Ladies and gentlemen, great to see you all here on our last sea day. And hasn't this been a great cruise, all these places? And it's been my great pleasure to be with you and to meet you and to show you what I know about some of these places. But this cruise all the way from the Dubai to Oman, India, so many places, Maldives, Seychelles, correct me if I forget any, Kenya, Tanzania, Zanzibar, Madagascar, and then Mozambique, Maputo. Everybody really liked Maputo, I hear. And then, of course, now South Africa, and we're coming sort of to the jewel of our trip, sort of the dessert of all, which is Cape Town. And I've heard from numerous of you either been there many times or have lived there. And I'll give you just some look around the great area that it is of South Africa, even though there'll be things that perhaps you won't have time to see. I know a lot of you are going back out into the bush on safari just to get away from the waves, right? Well, Cape Town has been called the Tavern of the Seas because so many ships have come down here just to put in and rest and recuperate and to enjoy themselves, as we will. There's another saying in Africa which is called a snail always travels with its shell. And it means wherever you go travel, you always carry your own culture and language and such with you. So you have a certain perspective wherever you go. And perhaps Cape Town is the most international cities in Africa at this point, and many people for many centuries have come there and carried their own perspective and their own culture, and that's why South Africa is such a diverse and interesting place. But of course, it's also been a land of great conflict, which all started in Cape Town. It's called the mother city of South Africa because this is where the Cape Colony was founded and many of the immigrants first came. By contrast, Durban and the other ports on the eastern coast are relatively newer cities, of course. But of course, the question is, what happens when a snail leaves its shell at home? It becomes merely sluggish. Just warming you up here a little bit here. Well, anyway, that's the great view of the city bowl and the different peaks, Table Mountain and Lion's Tail, Signal Hill. But this is a city that's not really on the south coast. The city faces northwest, and that meant it was sheltered from these southerly winds and storms from the southeast. So there was an ideal bay. It's the Table Bay, and so it's always been a calm harbor relatively to all these other places. Now we're going to be cutting the farthest south of South African coast is Cape Agulhas, which is the old name for the needle in Portuguese, and also the currents that run rough off of these other points down here. So we'll come up to the northwest past Cape of Good Hope and then come around into Cape Town. But as you can feel, we have all these, let's say, rolly seas out here. They've been running 3 to 5 meters, 10 to 15 feet or so, with an occasional multiple wave that picks up the ship and gives us a little reminder that we're still on board, let's say. But this is all caused by the warm current, the Agulhas current that comes down and meets the colder Southern Ocean. I talked about this many months ago to you, but where we are, we'll be coming around where the seas get quite a bit colder, and we come around into Cape Town, and then there's a Benguela current that goes up the coast towards Namibia. That's a cold current coming off of the Southern Ocean, and it creates quite a bit of marine life there because of the more mineral waters of the Southern Ocean that are coming this way from the west. But we are passing, if you haven't noticed, right in the area that's the pink zone. This is actually a routing chart for ships to avoid the worst of it. And as I mentioned, there's now satellite monitoring of rogue waves so that ships can avoid those areas where they tend to build up and happen. But we'll be fine. We'll be there around, this is the point, Cape Agulhas, and we'll come around into, even stormier seas. No, that's in the winter time. We're here, remember, this is summertime down here. But this is the famous painting of the Flying Dutchman, the ship that got lost and was just sailing on its own, having lost its crew. If you see this, let me know. That's my next assignment. Well, this is the kind of coast, if we get in close enough, this is a cathedral rock with a great thrashing of the waves on it, especially in the winter season. And then underneath the water, there's a great amount of sea life here. Tremendous schools of fish come here to feed, and then they're followed by the famous great whites, which, like in Australia, they have the highest amount of sightings of them here in these waters. But that's a good reason not to go swimming off of the ship. Here's the point as we come in. This is Hook Bay, and then we'll come around into the harbor, just like the Portuguese first did in 1482. This is Bartholomew Dias. And he came and realized that there was a way around Africa. That's the story of the Portuguese Empire that we've already heard. Here he is. He put up a cross, and there are a couple of monuments on the coast to that first discovery. Prior to the Portuguese coming, this was an unrecorded passage, at least in Europe. And a century or so later, this is what the illustration of what was for the Dutch East India Company, though it's in French, the Cap de Bonne Espérance. And you see this is the great scenery that we will see with the Table Mountain and the Lion's Tail, Signal Hill, and the back of the lion. This is the first fortress. You see the little Dutch flag on the lower left-hand side, which is still there. That the fortress of Cape Hope is still now downtown. Now this whole area after the first encampments up against the hills has, of course, had landfill and spread out into the larger city that it is today. But when the Dutch came, and the Portuguese came, and the Dutch settlers finally came, there were people in the city area and in the mountains around them. These are the Khoisan people, who are related to the people that are still out in the farther bush. They've actually been driven out into the bush by the settlement of this area. They were hunters and gatherers, and they did have cattle and sheep that they had brought from somewhere in Central Africa many, many centuries ago, maybe 1,000 or more years ago. There's also evidence around this area that the human habitation goes back to about 100,000 years ago. But these people were initially friendly. They traded food and supplies to the first sailors who came into Cape Town, particularly cattle. They were like the Zulu. They had domesticated zebu cattle, and this was a prime refueling, victualling place for all the navies that came by here. The first settlement was by Jan van Riebeck in 1652. The Dutch East India Company realized this was such a good place to shelter ships and have supplies that they landed some settlers, built the fort, and founded the city of Cape Town. They had initially good relations with the Khoisan people, but then they tried to enslave them and put them to work and drove them essentially away, and then brought in more settlers. The land around here is not as lush as we saw in KwaZulu the last couple of days, but it's still good for grazing, and then with the right agriculture, it's very bountiful. So here's the Dutch East India ships sheltering here in that time. And this in the City Museum, you can see this panorama, which has the points and the fort and the settlements. Now, this is, of course, all filled up quite a bit more, but that is the look back when it was a rather small settlement on the way to the wider world. The fort is still there, right downtown, and it's still an active South African military headquarters. And there's still quite a few evidence of the first Dutch settlement, windmills and some of the Cape architecture. But then the controversies in Europe flared, and the British versus the French versus the Dutch led the Royal Navy to come in and land and have a battle with the Dutch in 1806 to take Cape Town as a Royal Navy base, which it was until the independence of South Africa. And so this led to more English settlers coming in. So this sort of set up South Africa as a conflict between European powers. The British just didn't want the French to take it above all. But between the English and the Dutch and then the natives, that's the mixture that is South Africa today. So here's the city seal, which is Sens Bona, which is it's all for the good, mate. I think that's the Latin translation. And then the colony, Cape Colony, spread across the lands. Now, the Dutch were there in the settlements in the Western Cape before the English came in and brought more settlers and landed, particularly the southern cities, Port Elizabeth, Durban, and the others were primarily established by English colonization. And through the early 1800s and such, this became again one of those penal colonies where they would ship out convicts to settle new lands and often put them on the frontier, sort of like what happened for Australia and the Americas. But this led to a lot of conflicts between the original Dutch settlers, and there was the frontiersmen were called the trekboer, which means in Dutch the horse-drawn farmers who are always going out and setting up new towns and settlements, and often had to battle with the various natives who resisted. Now, this is a battle with the Zulu. The Kosan mostly retreated. They were not an armed or militarily adept force, so they essentially went further into the northern Cape areas, and there's still remnant populations out in the far reaches of South Africa, but most of the Kosan around the Western Cape they got put in slavery, they got intermixed, and now they are part of what they call the Cape Coloreds, which are mixed race, which you'll see in Cape Town itself. When the British continued their advancement to take the better farmland into Eastern Cape particularly, and then finally in the KwaZulu area, again, the Zulus, like you heard maybe if you're one of the demonstrations, were particularly resistant to the incursions and led to some famous battle. This is Isanwala in 1879, where a troop of British Army numbered about 150 faced about 5,000 natives, who then used the classic pincer movement and attacked. And in spite of the better firepower of the British, they were overwhelmed and killed to the man, sort of like Custer's last stand. And as we say in America, he died for our sins. But nonetheless, the Zulu and all of the others were finally subdued, but not the Boers. Now, this is a very brief history of a very terrible conflict between the Dutch settlers and the Afrikaans, and then the British as they came in. And there was two wars that then led to the submission of the Orange Free State and Transvaal as British control continued to march north, essentially. This is the same time that the gold and the diamond industry was founded, and so the British Empire really valued all this area, not just for the agriculture, but for the great wealth that the mines were producing. And to this day, there's still this sort of tense relations between some of the old Afrikaan communities that are in the countryside and the larger culture and all the other conflicts of South Africa, as you've heard about on our way here. Well, famously, Robben's Island, right there off the harbor in Cape Town, was the prison island dating from the early 1600s. And so this has a long and terrible history, but now it's a national park and a site to go out and see if you're a history buff and want to hear all of these stories of the troubles of South Africa, which have finally led to a peaceful time now. Well, this is just a view coming into the harbor. And hopefully it'll be clear, or not too early in the morning. We can see how the city has grown so much. It has a skyline which is in perspective to the great mountain, Table Mountain, and the other hills of the area. But this has to be one of the great harbor entrances in any major city in the world, sort of like Rio de Janeiro or others that you can name your own hometown. But the Table Mountain is a geological uplift and sedimentary rock, and very interesting, particularly if you have the time to climb to the top. That's funny. They didn't have mountain climbing on the tour office. I don't know why. There is a bus, they say, that goes right to a cable car to get to the top. Meanwhile, we'll be down in the harbor area with our ship coming in to right next to the Victoria and Albert Harbor, or V&A Harbor, it's called here. Now we'll be at the Duncan Dock, which is up to the right-hand side up here, and we'll be snug right there. We're a little too big to get into the older, smaller piers that lead into the center harbor, but you can take a shuttle bus right over to the entrance to the harbor, or you can walk across the road and come in on your own if you like a little hike. But this is a great harbor because it's been turned into an amusement center, I'd say. So you have some bridges over some of the inlets and the inner harbors, and then a lot of small museum shops, parks, entertainment, marina, and condominiums if you want to stop and pick one up on the way. This inland, though, by the highway is the old signal tower, which that ball was the noon drop to time all the chronometers of all the ships so that they knew by the signal tower that that was high noon and everybody was on the same time when they went out sailing for determination of longitude above all. This is the old clock in the harbor. And so this is a great thing just to go walk around in this. I'm sure many of you have already been there. If you haven't, this is easy because it's just a walk away from our ship. So here's the old customs house and the bridges over the canals coming into the inner harbor. By the way, that building is now the largest emporium of African arts and crafts. So if you haven't bought an elephant yet, there you go. They'll pack it and ship it and hopefully feed it all the way until it gets to your backyard, the trading post. But even if you might have picked up too much to take home, this is worth going in and just looking at because it's sort of a summation of not just South Africa, but they have a lot of native arts and crafts from all over Africa. So it's quite a little museum on its own. And then these old warehouses have been turned into restaurants and cinemas and such, boat rides, and the proverbial eye in the sky. So it's made the old industrial harbor into a entertainment zone. So it's a lot of fun. Most of the shipping is elsewhere in the harbor in the northern side of town, and a few local heroes are still remembered, including their noble park of all the South Africans who've won the Nobel Prizes. So this is a part of the walkway along the harbor. And there's still some of the old industrial docks. This is an old graving dock, a dry dock right there in the center. And it's Cape Town is still booming because a lot of people now have second homes, or else people in Johannesburg, which is a hot and dusty part of the country, come down here to be by the sea. So even a lot of the old buildings or warehouses are being converted into galleries and shops. So it's an ever more lively city, particularly as its own industry is not so busy. It's really become a cultural and an entertainment city along with the shipping. So from the harbor you can, it's a bit of a long walk, but if you go down by taxi into the main downtown area, there's sort of a grid layout, and it's fairly big, but there's a lot to see. Long Street is the major shopping street, and there are a number of other parks, and of course a lot of the glass boxes of all the businesses that are there. But some of the old colonial buildings are still here, the government offices, courthouses, war memorials. You can see all this on your own. This is a new statue of a fellow who kicks a round thing around. Oh, that's right, that's football. I forget, because Cape Town had the 2010 World Cup, and they built this stadium, which is out in Greenport to the west of the harbor, but the design looks just like one of the Zulu women's hats, if you didn't see those there. This is the old City Hall, which is still active, and the plaza out in front was originally a place for parades, military parades, and also punishments, and then finally the last major event, Nelson Mandela, when he was released from 27 years of imprisonment on Robben Island, came and gave a speech to the nation urging reconciliation. So that's the center of the civic area of town. And then around it are period buildings, sort of Cape architecture, the typical Dutch style face, a lot of new buildings. And then as you go up the hills, you get all these neighborhoods. And some of these townhouses date back to the mid-1600s. And if you go further up, there's an area called Bokap, which means sort of up from the Cape in Dutch, and it features a lot of small, brightly painted houses. And this was where the Cape Coloreds lived, meaning they were mixed Malay, Indonesian, Khoisan that had mixed in, and this was sort of their own part of town. And to this day, it is a neighborhood that's apart right from downtown, but it is also the center of the Muslim communities, of which there are quite a few in Cape Town. And so you have this varied mix of people all over the whole area. Now, I found this language group illustration to show that this is a fairly segregated town because, first of all, they have these mountains all over the area that divide valleys from capes and neighborhoods. And so here the Red, or the Hossa, which is the majority black African group that mostly came from Eastern Cape. And then you have the yellow is English-speaking, the green is Afrikaans-speaking, which is, of course, the Dutch-style language that's been here for so many centuries. And then the other areas are mixed. So if you take a taxi or go around the whole area, you have very stark contrast between all of the neighborhoods. You have fancy condominiums down on the beach, but if you go to what's called the Cape Flats, that's inland over Table Mountain, then you have the areas which were the homelands and also people that were driven out by force from the old neighborhoods downtown during apartheid or earlier. So this is most of the black Africans live out in what they call the flats. This is one of the towns called Langa, which has been famous for its terrible conditions for people. Now they finally strung up some electricity, but all these shacks that they had to build themselves when they were driven out of the city had no plumbing and were dangerous and in bad condition until recently, because now the current President Zuma has made a point of eliminating this terrible housing for people and build new housing with all the services. And so you can go out there if you're on your way to further out to the valleys, see the new developments that are there to improve the lives of the local people who can't afford the seaside lifestyle. Now, another part of Cape Town, if you go to the north of the downtown, there's this great part of the hills to the north of Table Mountain. This is the University of South Africa, which was funded by Cecil Rhodes as the premier university for Cape Town. And this man sort of looms large in Cape Town especially, as he was the prime minister of the colony and the chief businessman founding the De Beers Company and the Kimberley mines, and he was a unabashed imperialist and believed that the British Empire should control the wealth of South Africa and continue its march toward the north to connect British East Africa with Egypt, build a railroad, as Philip Hearst talked about, all the way from Cape Town to Cairo. And so he was such a dynamic businessman that it led to more and more settlements and conflicts up into Central Africa. And he's been very controversial ever since. He was by far the leading businessman of the era, but also promoted that Britain, along with Northern Europe, should conquer and benefit by all these colonies. And in the late 1800s, he wrote that the future of the world will be the British Empire working with the German and the French empires to control all of the world. And Mark Twain famously said, well, I admire the man, but I want to buy a piece of the rope they hang him with eventually. Well, he did not die violently. He actually died at age 48 while trying to continue this imperial effort all over Africa in particular. And so has statues all over Cape Town in particular. And he died out in his home in Maritzburg later. But this statue at the university, if you haven't seen this in the news, has been the subject of a lot of controversy because a lot of the native African or Bantu blacks do not find him a great hero. And so they, in the student kind of way, they protested this April to take down the statue and put it in a museum maybe, but not have him lord over their modern South Africa and their education. And so, yes, they did finally yield, and they moved him indoors where he doesn't have a sea view. But this is one said to be his last words: so little done, so much to do. But he still, let's say, still has his monuments. This is a memorial to him right near the university. But his grave, he died actually in Rhodesia, and he wanted to be buried on a mountaintop, which is now a national park in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. And even the government there, which of course was a great reaction to the empire and Cecil Rhodes in particular, they preserved his site because they don't want to wake him up lest he cause more trouble. Well, another thing right near the university was also a grant of Cecil Rhodes to give this great Kirstenbosch garden, which is a planted garden that has what they call the Cape Floristic region, which this whole area, Table Mountain down to the Cape, has over 220 endemic species that are unique to this area and nowhere else, primarily because it has a certain soil and a certain Mediterranean-style climate. And so this great garden, which is about 30 hectares, was granted out of the private property of Cecil Rhodes, and it's worth going to see if you like flowers. But the most famous is the national flower, the proteus. And this is that large bloom. You see it in florist shops. But this is originally right here from the Cape. And that particular garden walk is quite beautiful. And they have these tremendous flowers all the way down to Cape Hope, up in the mountains. Many of them are now protected because they grow nowhere else. And then as you go down to Cape Hope, I'm going to give you the view as we leave the major city going to the west and south. So this is where the string of beaches are quite beautiful. Camps Bay, and these peaks come from Table Mountain, the Seven Sisters, and you can see it's pretty rough country. So these little towns are fairly isolated until you get over to the next bay, and so it gives this whole region a beautiful quality of isolation near the big city and all the conveniences. The next big bay over is called False Bay because it's so big, ships would sail in there thinking they were going around to the Atlantic, but they actually didn't reach it. And this has the town of Muizenberg, and then Simon's Bay on the lower side here, which is the South African Navy headquarters. It used to be the British Navy, of course. And then this beautiful flat bay, which is noted for its calm waters. If you want to go swimming, this is where you usually go because if there's any weather, all the other beaches are a little rough or rocky. But this town was where Cecil Rhodes had his home and actually died right there at his estate on the hill overlooking this little town. I'll just show you this as typical Cape architecture, but it's most famous as a surfing and swimming destination. So there are little painted cabanas, and then this beautiful big flat beach with a long stretch of beach, which is very safe for swimming. So it's on a nice day, summer day like now, it would be full of people. And so I was there in January, actually, and I had my son with me, and we went down there, and there he is. He got fitted out as a native, well, Polynesian style, and then went out and did. Now, I know you're all going to go surfing. I just give you a few tips here on it. First of all, be sure to keep that on your head, and then watch out for the waves. That's all I learned. So here he goes, and it's fun if you like the taste of salt water. Whoops. Oh, well. Try again. Well, after that, now what he's done, he's finished university, and he moved to Hawaii. I should never have taken him to the beach. He'll never be any good anymore, but he'll have fun. Meanwhile, in the same False Bay, there's Simon's Town, which again, a little Cape architecture style. And then the reason to go over there other than going surfing is if you ever like to look at these little guys. These are the African penguins, which are like a chin strap penguin. And they were hunted out, but they were actually, when they were protected, they came back and to this little part called the Boulders, if any of you have been there. And that's False Bay looking over to Cape Argulas. And, of course, maybe you've been to Antarctica or you have pet penguins in your home pond, but here I will just inflict on you. How do penguins like their drinks? On the rocks. Well, at least in this place. And, let's say, how do penguins go online? With their web feet. All right. You can groan all you want, but here's another one anyway. Why are there no penguins in Britain? Because penguins are afraid of whales. A local joke, I think. And then the other one, two penguins are going to dinner, and the sign no longer says elegant casual. And the one says, that's okay, we're in our black and white pajamas, they'll never notice. All right, well, that's enough of that. But anyway, they are charming, and if you don't get too close to smell them. Well, I know a number of you going out of the wine country and all these beautiful areas just outside of Cape Town. This is Stellenbosch, which is in a great bowl out in to the east of Cape Town, and it's famous for its wine. Some of you may have been there, or you're going after off the ship, but this whole area has, again, mostly Dutch-style architecture, Afrikaans spoken, and above all, the fine orchards and wines and the country lifestyle that is quite different than the busy city. And and out there we also have a tour to the ostrich farm. And one of the local dishes in Cape Town is curried ostrich meat. And so if you haven't talked to an ostrich, you're in for a treat maybe. But anyway, these have hatcheries where they produce them for feathers and for their meat. And this is a phenomena that has started in South Africa. I mean, they were originally wild, and the greatest production is actually over in the Eastern Cape, far from here. But there's still some ostrich farms near Cape Town. And so here's a male and a female talking about something about eggs. And the story is out in the wilder bush. The ostriches are, a couple of females are trotting along on the open plain, and they turn around and they say there are two big males up on the ridge looking at them. So the two females say, well, let's go this way. And they start going that way. They notice the males are coming down the ridge toward them. And then the females say, well, we better get going. And so they start running. And meanwhile, the males are pursuing and catching up on them. And the two females say, we'll never get away from these big, mean guys. We better hide. And so they stop and they stick their head in the ground. And then the two males come running up right alongside next to them and say, where'd they go? Where'd they go? Now, that's a clean joke, so remember that. Well, anyway, this is perhaps people think it's a myth, but the female ostriches do put their head in the ground to check on their eggs that they've buried. And they will, on the midday, they'll turn them over a bit doing this. So they actually do that. They're not afraid of males. They're big enough and can handle themselves, though. Well, anyway, I'm going to show you a little bit more down to Cape Hope, which is, again, on to the south and east of the city of Cape Town. But this is a tremendous trip if you haven't done it, because you go over these mountains. You go past Camps Bay, then you go over the valley, and then along this great road that has been built in the mountainside. This is just some of the condominiums and even an oil rig that are out on the different points of the land. But there's a famously tortuous path to go on, and they built a highway all the way along this area on this rough coast with this beautiful mountainscapes, and again, towns on the way and the flats. But this is Chapman's Drive, or Chappie they call it, which is cut into the cliff and makes the passage all the way down to the Cape Point very easy now. Otherwise, it was impassable. It could only go by ship. And this, again, it goes into little bits of old farms, and here's a monument to Bartholomew Diaz. And then you could get down to the rocky tips of the Cape of Good Hope. Now, this doesn't really have anybody living there because it's all cliffs, and now it's a protected area and wildlife protection, particularly for the floral life. And then you can see how rough the sea is down there. This is just on a nice day, and these fur seals are there to go surfing themselves, but maybe it was too rough for them even. And you can see the size of the waves. Again, this is where the Southern Ocean hits all of this tips of land and is particularly full of danger for navigators. Now, curiously, this ship dared to go near. Look at that. Looks familiar. And right near a underwater reef that looked like a watery volcano. I couldn't quite believe it, except fortunately I wasn't near it. But that's right off of what's called Cape Point, which is the very tip of the Cape of Good Hope. It's not as far as south as Cape Agulhas, but it's still very dramatic. And again, if there's a tour or you can go there on your own, there's a funicular that goes up to the top in the lighthouse, and then you can see the Cape Point. So it's a dramatic place like all of Cape Town. Now, this is going back to Table Mountain, and there you can go up to the station where they have a cable car up to it. And again, if you haven't done that, that's the great thing to do in Cape Town, because we do have time to do at least this. When you come up into the sort of fortress up there to handle the cable car, you can hike all the way up, but it gets very, very steep at the very end. And it is a tremendous overlook for the whole area. It also has endangered, endemic Cape Florid plants that are only up on the very top of the mountain. Now, it gets very cold and windy up there, depending on the weather, when it gets socked in with clouds and in the winter time for here, which is, of course, the northern summer. But they had this fibos, which is a particular kind of shrubbery and flowering plants up there that only exist on this particular mountain. So this is, if you're a botanist, oh, there's some rare plants. I think they're called Cape Town selfies. And I hope they didn't step back too far, because it's completely treacherous up there. It's all walled off for people to go up and visit, but it's quite a cliff. And that's the view from up there. So it's better than any skyscraper I've ever been up. And there's, you can see the Greenpoint, the Cape Town football stadium that just built, and other parts of the city. So it's a dramatic place and a beautiful city, a beautiful land and sea here. And for all of its history and troubles, it's still a great place, often voted the greatest place to visit if you don't live there. And a beautiful place all around. So I'm going to leave you with one last thought about our trip together. I saw more than I remember, and remember more than I saw. And so our voyage has been quite remarkable, I think, and I appreciate your coming and listening to me about it, and I hope I've shared things that you won't get to see, and maybe you'll remember more than you saw, which is the blessing of our travel. So I wish you a bon voyage, and I thank you very much for all. Thank you, John, for his running this great theater. And if you want to, thank you. If you want to follow what I'm doing, there's my email, my research vessel, my sailboat, and then a marine propulsion engineering project if you are curious about it. But thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next sea. Thank you.